Hey, welcome to the show. It has been a very long time since I have made a video for this channel. So I am back to talk about a couple of important things that have been going on in the world. I want to fill you in on some stuff that I've been working on and talk about the future of money. All right, Molly Elmore here. Happy to be back here. Um, so what we're going to talk about today is how tokenization is actually beginning. So when I first started to study this concept, probably like a year or two ago, it seemed very conceptual, like this idea of this future world where assets would be tokenized and it's going to change how like trade and capital markets and even money works. And it seemed like a cool thing to talk about, but nobody was really doing it. So it was almost like practically discussing like some kind of sci-fi future world. However, in the past, I'd say about 4 to 5 months, I've been involved in projects where actual assets are being actually tokenized and they're being traded. And so this sort of future thing that we were talking about is now here. Now, it still was kind of being done in the background, maybe a couple of smaller projects. You could even call them kind of like beta tests just to make sure everything works. Although we've known from projects like Project Guardian out of Singapore that the institutional financial system, the financial world, has been doing these beta tests for quite some time. So the stuff that I'm talking about that's more recent, to me, it's more hitting like the more mainstream world because I'm not part of the institutional financial system. So the projects that I'm involved in are kind of a little bit more for regular people, for your average accredited investor who wants to participate in an investment opportunity, or businesses that are looking to maybe raise money, or even some real estate projects that are looking to grow and expand and need investments. So what this looks like, though, now that we're kind of seeing multiple projects actually kind of come to fruition, is that the banking system is not operating the way that it used to. And that's created a problem. And so the best offers in business, in my opinion, are solutions to painful problems. That if I have some cool technology and I go and I present it to somebody, but everything's working fine in their world, why would they disrupt what they're doing and invest money in something that they really don't need? If everything's going great, then they got no problems. What does this technology do for them? This is actually just a sidebar for a little bit. I've been on quite a few sales calls with companies in the tokenization and blockchain and technology space. And I know that we are still very early because there aren't any great salespeople yet. The technology developers in some cases, or even just technology visionaries, are attempting to sell a lot of these packages, but they really have no idea how sales works. So to me, a big indicator that it's showtime for real with tokenization is when like very skilled salespeople move over from the sectors that they're in now towards this new space. And we're seeing that some sectors, particularly the mortgage industry and other kind of related to the loan world, things are not operating as they were. And I think the sophisticated salespeople will move over. Okay, back to tokenization. And what are we kind of seeing happening? The banking system is not operating as it used to, as I mentioned a minute ago. And so what that means is that a lot of companies that typically raise money from banks, borrow money from banks, it ain't working. They're not getting that money. So they're having to go to other solutions. That is kind of where I'm seeing the most opportunities, is helping kind of like commercial real estate and, larger businesses that want to raise substantial amounts of money. They are having to be creative and resourceful. And this is where tokenization comes into play. So we're just going to go over a little bit of a brief definition of what I mean by tokenization, because this is like a new label, right? That it's like a lot of labels in business, they're made up and we assign meaning to them. My definition of tokenization is when you take an actual asset, like let's refer to a house, for example. Real estate is a very easy one to understand. When you have this house, there is a deed associated with it that indicates you own the house. So when you tokenize this house, you're not actually putting this house on the blockchain, because that doesn't even make sense how that would logistically work. But what you can do is you can take the property rights that are listed out in this deed, and you can represent them in kind of like a electronic deed, which we'll call that an NFT. NFT just means it's unique. So there shouldn't be 10 copies of the same deed for the same house circulating, because the house really only has one owner, right? In this case, there's only one deed to go to that house. All right, so you can take this deed, you can represent the rights associated with owning that property that are in the deed as an NFT, and you can register that on the blockchain. The blockchain is an accounting ledger that stores information about transactions. So if I own the rights to this house and that's being kind of represented by this deed that's in an NFT that is now been logged on the blockchain, if I were to sell this house to someone else, the property rights associated with that house get transferred over. So that what that means logistically is like, I sell you the NFT, and when you buy the NFT, you now have the rights that that NFT represents. And this is why the blockchain can make transactions with something like real estate very, very quick and inexpensive, because if you've ever bought an NFT, doesn't matter if it's like a picture of a monkey, you see the logistical process that you have a wallet, there are funds in that wallet, the NFT has a price, you transfer the funds in your wallet to whoever owns that NFT now, and we have an exchange. I get the NFT, they get the money, the value, and now the transaction is completed. So now whoever I sold it to has the property rights to this house. Now, if you've ever bought or sold a house kind of in the old school way, like it doesn't work that quickly, right? You tend to really have real estate owners, you got to put money in escrow, there's sort of, you got to go to a closing, and it can be quite a time consuming process. So if you had a house and you wanted to sell it very quickly, that's not so easy to do in the current real estate world, because there's all these kind of like processes that you have to follow and some red tape and all that stuff. So in this tokenization of real estate world, logistically, it is now very, very easy and efficient to sell a house from one party to another. Now, it's not going to stop with just real estate, because there are many, many assets that have value, and real estate too is a pretty broad category. You have like single family houses, and then you have like apartment complexes, you have commercial real estate, you have resorts. I mean, you have things like amusement parks. I mean, there's a tremendous variety in the types of real estate entities. And when you think about investing in something like a resort, let's say somebody was going to build $100 million resort, and in the old world, they would go to a series of banks and maybe some, like what Jimmy calls big kid investors, and raise money that way. Well, there might be a variety of reasons why that's either not possible for you or not desirable for you. And you could now, via tokenization and this kind of new introduction of digital assets to kind of a broad market, you could now raise money a very different way. You could tokenize this future resort. And let's say, I'm just going to make up numbers. Let's say you're going to divide it into 1,000 tokens. It's kind of like, think about stock for a company. You could have 1,000 shares in a company. So you could have 1,000 tokens in this commercial real estate resort. And then you could sell those to people via the block. I mean, you can kind of invite them into your world and explain to them, what's the terms of this deal? What are all the legal documents that you need to read to understand, in the same way that you would kind of make that investment in the old world after doing your due diligence. That all can be done via online documents and what's called a data room. And if you are, now there are still rules, like laws around who's allowed to participate in this type of thing. And for now, in the United States specifically, only accredited investors are allowed to participate in the example that I'm referring to, this kind of tokenized resort. And so let's say you are a accredited investor and you go and you do your research, and this sounds like a really great opportunity for you. You could actually buy equity in this resort very quickly. And now you would have in your wallet a digital asset, probably an NFT, that would represent the ownership rights that you have to this certain percentage of the resort. Now, the thing about something like a resort, right, there's a lot of different ownership rights. There's the right to sell your shares. There's the right to make decisions within the business. There's the right to maybe like use your shares as collateral. Like there's a whole list of them that they're referred to as a bundle of sticks. And so don't always assume though that when we're talking about tokenization of assets, that every single right is going to be kind of sold in exchange. That's just not always the case. So it's important to understand if you are hypothetically going to participate in an investment opportunity around tokenization, just be clear before you make that investment. What exactly are the rights that I am buying? And what rights do I not get? Because I wouldn't assume that if you invested in a resort, for example, that you're going to be making like decisions about like hiring and the menu at the restaurant, all that kind of stuff. So there are cases where you have rights in terms of governance and you participate in making decisions, but there's also going to be times when you're really just money and you're going to get a return on that either by some kind of dividend or potentially you might have to wait until a certain amount of time has passed and you can sell that for a profit. So the point I'm trying to make here is that this tokenization of assets for raising money for something like a commercial real estate venture, there's going to be a variety of different ways that those rights are kind of sold or shared or transferred. And don't assume that every right is going to be included. So you got to read the fine print in these cases. So the tokenization aspect of real estate and businesses that are looking to raise money, like we're starting to see that happen now. We're still very early. There's going to be education on the part of the entities raising money around educating their market, like what's a wallet, what kind of digital assets do I need to pay for this? How do I get them? So be prepared if you are participating in helping a business raise funds through tokenization, that there are quite a list of things that you have to help your investor understand and learn if they are new to this space. And if you've been in the kind of blockchain crypto world for a while, you realize that there's a very small percentage of us who are knowledgeable about this relative to like the rest of the world. So there is going to be a responsibility on the part of us who are early to kind of help onboard new people and educate them about how this works and, you know, what do they need to know? What software is involved? There's a lot of like language and jargon that some people can find intimidating. So that's kind of part one of what I'm seeing happening actually in the tokenization space is businesses that were traditionally kind of going to the banking sector or other kind of big kid financial institutions to raise money. That's not happening. So, and we could speculate about what's going on in the banking system. Is it collapsing? Is there just like a liquidity shortage? Like it's hard to get a clear answer, but doesn't really matter for those businesses who are typically used to going to those entities. They're not able to do that at this time. So they are having to resort to some more creative solutions, and tokenization and raising money from a different group of people is happening. It's happening right now. The second thing I think that is a major change for like the world, not to be overly dramatic here, but we're going to start to see that assets like gold, for example, are going to be tokenized and used to back sovereign currencies. Now, if you think globally to a particular region that has a tremendous amount of resources, but illogically is quite impoverished relative to some other Western nations, is the continent of Africa and all the nations in Africa. Now, not every nation in Africa has gold, but quite a few of them do. And some of them have actually pretty substantial amounts of gold, some of which is not even dug up yet. So we refer to that as in-ground assets. So imagine this for a second, how cool this is going to be when this happens. I actually wrote an ebook on this, which you're welcome to check out at valhiladvisors.io. But imagine you're a country in Africa, and I'm not going to pick a particular one because this applies to quite a few of them. And you were kind of a colony of a European nation entity, maybe France or England or something. And during that time, sort of you developed this kind of trade relationship with the colonizer, and you were kind of paid for the resources your nation has. Let's say maybe you grow cocoa beans and you also have coffee or chocolate or whatever, and you have this trading agreement that's not very profitable for you. And in order to facilitate this kind of global trade, you needed to build like a port and maybe railroad tracks and roads or whatever. So what happened historically was that entities like the IMF and the World Bank, kind of at the behest of these colonizing nations, went to these African countries and were like, hey, we're going to help you make a whole lot of money selling cocoa beans, but first you got to build these roads and this port. So we're going to lend you some money and you can use that money to build all of this infrastructure. What they probably didn't tell you in the beginning, though, was that you might have to hire like specific companies to manage it. You can't just hire whoever you want to do that. There's a great book by John Perkins called Confessions of an Economic Hitman that really details in much greater detail I'm going to do in this video about how that worked. Fascinating book. Highly recommend it. Okay, back to our Africa example. So you have this nation. It's now in debt to the IMF or the World Bank because they had to borrow money to build these ports and these roads. And it kind of sucks because like the debt, it's hard to pay off that debt. Imagine you're like a young 20-something, you've got this like maxed out credit card and you've got to pay this interest on it and you can't make the pay off the loan. So the interest kind of accumulates and it grows and grows. You're going to kind of get to this point where you are not really able to service this debt anymore. And this kind of sucks because you might have to negotiate a second loan with different terms that are maybe less favorable, but what are you going to do when you are in a really difficult position in terms of debt? It also means that a lot of the money you as an African nation, in our example here, the money that you raise as a country that should be going to things like schools and healthcare and other sort of citizen services, you're not really able to pay for those things because you have to pay the interest on this debt and try to chip away at this principal. So it creates a very difficult situation for many of these kind of resource-rich countries. They're not only in Africa. I'm just using that as an example because quite a few of them are, where they are kind of they're in an extremely difficult position because they're making stuff and they're shipping it out. They have not been able to negotiate very favorable trade deals, unfortunately. And they've got all this debt. And so you have this situation where the citizens of these countries are not getting the support that they should get from their government. So what do you do about this? How do you solve this, sometimes referred to as the sovereign debt crisis? And that's a broad generalization. Sovereign debt is a problem in a lot of places. We're going to just stick with my Africa example where it's a resource-rich nation who is not having a great situation because of their debt with the World Bank. Well, what would happen if this country happened to have a whole bunch of gold underground and they were like, gold is pretty valuable. What if instead of doing trade in dollars, which dollars are very expensive for our African country example because of the exchange rates, what if instead of doing trade in dollars, we issued our own sovereign currency that is backed by gold and we could do it without having to dig up the gold? We're going to back it by in-ground assets. And there's very cool, now I'm still learning about this stuff, so but my understanding is that there's very cool satellite technology that can very accurately kind of profile what's underground and determine what percentage of whatever's underground is gold versus something else. I mean, metals and dirt and other resources like diamonds, whatever, they all have a different density. So you can tell like if something is a very specific density, then it's probably gold. Again, not an expert on that, still learning about it, but I am fairly confident that this technology exists that would allow you to confirm what are the resources that are underground. And you probably would need, if you're this country doing this, you would need a third-party auditor who's impartial to verify that this is in fact accurate. And then you could issue your sovereign currency without having to dig up the gold. Because if you think about it, somebody gave me this example a long time ago, like when we mine gold, what generally happens is it gets dug up, which wrecks the land, right? So if this was like farmland, now you have a mine there, you can't farm where there's a mine. And you go through this very expensive process of digging it up, and then you've got to refine it. So you got to pay these refiners to do it. And you kind of have it in these gold bars. And then generally it gets kind of hidden back in the ground in some vault somewhere. So it's like a lot of busy work, very expensive busy work that is very destructive to the land. Like you can't live on it, you can't farm it once this mine has been, put into place. And for what? So you can bury it back in the ground? Okay, well, why is that even necessary? Why can't it be backed as an in-ground asset? I mean, the idea with backing a currency with gold is just so you can't print it out of nothing. There has to be like constraints around how much money is printed. And hypothetically, if someone did want to redeem that money for gold, you could dig it up and go through that process of refining it. Like, that's definitely a possible option, but not everybody needs to do that. So do you really need to wreck this land to dig up the gold? All right, so let's say that all works out. And now you have our African country example. They've got a bunch of gold. They now issue this new gold-backed currency, which in terms of like the world market, the world supply chain, the global exchange, gold-backed currencies are a lot less subject to inflation than fiat currencies that can be printed out of nothing, like the US dollar. So now our African nation has a cool situation where their money is actually worth a lot, and they've got a lot of it, and it's backed by gold, so it's considered sound money or hard money. You could pay off those debts pretty quickly if you now had this abundant supply of cash. And now you'd actually have extra that you could go and participate in the global supply chain, negotiate your own deals, and you're no longer beholden to this kind of Western banking system. This transformation, which I'm actually quite confident is going to happen, is going to completely change the resource-rich nations of the world in terms of their bargaining power in the global exchange. And if you're familiar at all with the BRICS alliance, most of the BRICS countries are resource producers. China makes lots of stuff. Russia makes lots of stuff. India makes lots of stuff. And so these nations, who quite coincidentally were all either colonies or attempted colonies of the kind of City of London-led banking system, these colonies are kind of like, hey, you know what? Like, this dollar system isn't really a great deal for us. Like, we are beholden to this entity that is issuing dollars out of nothing, using that as a political tool. And what do we get out of it? Why do we need that? What if we just created our own kind of marketplace? I mean, anyone can join it, but it's not going to be kind of run by the rules of the dollar system. What if we created our own kind of global currency exchange and we let nations, issue their own currencies backed by whatever resources they have? In some cases, that could be gold, but many nations have a variety of resources that are considered valuable. So what if everybody who makes stuff, the resource-rich countries, if they started to back their currencies with this sound money, it would kind of upend the way things have worked, and we could finally see a thriving like middle class in a lot of these we call emerging markets or third world nations that have really struggled financially for a long, long time. And it could introduce like what we call a level playing field and some prosperity and opportunity for people to finally be educated and have things like clean water and homes with electricity, things that we in the West totally take for granted that are not commonplace in other parts of the world. So this to me is one of the most significant world-changing aspects of tokenization, is the ability for resource-rich nations to back their money supply with whatever resources they have and participate in global trade, pay off their debt, and finally be able to have money to serve the needs of their constituents. Like, if you're not a fan of this, like, I don't understand why. Now, sometimes when I bring this topic up, people get, especially Americans, get defensive like about the dollar. And before you have that emotional reaction, just take a little time to understand who actually issues the dollar. As an American, I always thought my whole life that like the US government did, but that's not actually true. That was outsourced back in 1913 to a third party, which is actually a violation of the Constitution from my understanding. And we as citizens kind of pay interest on this money that this third party issues, and that's where a lot of our tax dollars go. And it's not really an American currency is where I'm going. And I don't want to get into this too much in this video, but just know that what we as sort of Westerners have been led to believe about the dollar isn't exactly accurate. So if you are supporting kind of emerging market nations with this resource tokenization so that they can finally thrive financially, don't see that as like anti-American. It's not. Like, we in the United States would love a level playing field as well. We have quite a bit of resources ourselves. So why are we not backing our sovereign currency with resources as well? So that is another topic for another video for another day. But I do think that we're seeing this stuff happen. Now, in terms of like digital assets, like something like XRP being used as sort of the plumbing for all of this new global trade, I'm pretty confident from my research and speaking to lots of people who spend even more time doing research than me, that all of that's in place. Like the banking system does not move quickly. They have like massive infrastructure teams that have been building and preparing for this blockchain-based money system to be implemented. But the question on everyone's mind is like, well, when's it going to happen? And if I knew that, I would be very happy and excited. I don't know when that's going to happen. I'm not an insider who is privy to that information. However, what I am good at is reading kind of the energy of what's going on. And I'm seeing like there's a higher level of frustration than I've ever seen before. Larry Fink has come out and made his little press tour talking about how tokenization is everything's going to be tokenized. So the mainstream financial system and the news media are now discussing this topic, which why would they be doing that if it was like years away? We also see that this Bitcoin ETF is kind of introducing a digital asset, a digital currency into the traditional financial ecosystem. We see companies like Ripple really announcing tons of strategic partnerships, and they're growing and hiring. And if it was like 10 years away from being adopted, that would seem kind of premature. So there's a lot of indicators, if you're paying attention, that we are close to this. I choose to look at this as kind of a fun adventure, and I don't get stressed out about when it's going to happen. I know that that's difficult for some people, but I will say that like the tokenization stuff's making progress. Like actual deals are being made, actual properties and businesses are being funded via the tokenization pathway, and it's exciting. So if you're watching this video, you're probably very early, like me, in this space. So we have to have some patience to understand that it's going to take a while. And this idea of a world where everything of value is tokenized, I mean, that's a multi-generational project. I mean, if you think just with real estate specifically, how many real estate properties there are in the world, like it's going to take a long time. But those are going to be really cool business opportunities for people who have the vision to understand how that's going to work. And how do you go to like every county in a country, like in the United States, for example, like real estate is generally deeds and whatever managed at the county level. How are you going to help every county across the country tokenize those deeds, like, and the various easements and all that kind of stuff? There's going to be incredible opportunities for people who are excited about what's coming to participate in this new business world. Now, those probably not watching this video, but those people who are resistant to this and think it's all made up and like, no way is it going to happen, every time I hear that, I'm just like thinking Blockbuster, 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 and how Blockbuster, 20 years ago was so adamant that like they were the king of the hill and that nobody was going to want to watch movies on, through the internet, and that like everybody was going to want to go to the Blockbuster and get their DVD. And here we are kind of half a generation later, and we see that Blockbuster is gone and Netflix dominates the sort of the media movie industry in part. So technology moves things. It changes businesses. Efficiencies are introduced. People are always kind of looking for something that's more convenient or fits into, less friction. And the blockchain and tokenization, without a doubt, remove very expensive and painful friction points. And so there's no way to me that multiple sectors of this are not going to adopt this technology in our lifetime, if not in the next like couple of years. Like it's coming. And when we see large institutions, big financial banks and whatever, issuing papers about this, like why would they do that if it was 20 years away? Like it just seems like a poor use of their internal resources. So get ready. If you are interested in tokenization and potentially investing in some properties or businesses or equity offerings or security offerings, like what a variety, we actually at Valhil are assembling a list, and we'll just kind of notify you when our opportunities are available. And if they're a good fit for you, you can learn more. If they're not a good fit, no worries. So I'll put the link to the vault in the comments, and please hop over and join us over there. And that's all I have for today. So, all right, I'll see you in the next one.